Have you ever wondered what would happen if a single moment of clumsiness could change your entire life? Lina Park was about to discover that sometimes the universe has a plan, even when you're just trying to make it through another ordinary Tuesday. She had no idea that the man she accidentally bumped into in that crowded elevator had been watching her every move for weeks, or that he was about to turn her world completely upside down. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The morning started like any other for Lina Park, with her alarm buzzing at exactly 6:30 a.m. in her cramped studio apartment on the outskirts of the city. She rolled over, her dark hair splayed across the pillow, and immediately felt that familiar knot of anxiety settling in her stomach. 3 months into her internship at Grant Industries, and she still felt like an imposter walking through those gleaming corporate halls. Lina had always been the quiet one, the girl who preferred the safety of shadows to the harsh spotlight of attention. In college, she'd been the student who sat in the back row, taking meticulous notes, while others raised their hands to answer questions. Her professors had praised her work ethic and attention to detail, but she'd never been the type to network at career fairs or schmooze at corporate mixers. Landing this internship had been a miracle, one she attributed to her stellar GPA rather than any social connections. The commute to downtown took nearly an hour on the subway, and Lina used the time to review her tasks for the day. She worked in the accounting department on the 15th floor, a maze of cubicles where she spent her days reconciling spreadsheets and organizing financial reports. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a foot in the door at one of the most prestigious companies in the country. Grant Industries was housed in a gleaming 50-story tower that seemed to pierce the clouds. The building was a testament to modern architecture, all glass and steel, reflecting the ambition and success of the company within. Lina always felt small when she approached the entrance, like she was entering a world that existed on a different plane from her own modest upbringing. Her supervisor, Margaret Chen, was a stern woman in her 50s who rarely smiled but had taken a surprising interest in Lina's development. Margaret had been the one to pull Lina aside during her second week and tell her that her work was exceptional, that she had a natural aptitude for financial analysis that couldn't be taught. It was the first time in months that Lina had felt like she might actually belong somewhere. The elevator ride to the 15th floor was usually uneventful, but this particular Tuesday morning, the building seemed busier than usual. Lina stood near the back of the crowded elevator, clutching her worn leather bag against her chest and trying to make herself as small as possible. She'd learned early in life that taking up less space meant drawing less attention, and drawing less attention meant fewer opportunities for embarrassment or criticism. As the elevator climbed past the 10th floor, more people squeezed in at each stop. Lina found herself pressed against the back wall, surrounded by men and women in expensive suits who carried themselves with the confidence that came from belonging to this world. She could smell their designer perfumes and aftershaves, could hear fragments of conversations about million-dollar deals and executive decisions. When the elevator lurched to a stop at the 20th floor, several people pushed toward the doors at once. Lina, caught in the shuffle, lost her balance and stumbled forward. Her shoulder collided with someone's back, and she felt her face flush with embarrassment as she realized she bumped into a tall man in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the murmur of conversations around them. She kept her eyes downcast, focused on the polished leather shoes that probably cost more than her monthly rent. "I didn't mean to." The man turned slightly, and Lina caught a glimpse of a strong jawline and perfectly styled dark hair before she quickly looked away again. She expected him to be annoyed, maybe even say something cutting about clumsy interns who didn't know their place. Instead, she heard a voice that was surprisingly warm and measured. "No harm done," he said quietly, his tone gentle enough that it made her risk a quick glance upward. For just a moment, their eyes met, steel gray meeting warm brown, and Lina felt something electric pass between them. It was probably her imagination, the result of too much caffeine and not enough sleep, but she could have sworn she saw something like recognition in his gaze. The elevator dinged at the 15th floor, and Lina practically fled, mumbling another apology as she squeezed past him and escaped into the familiar territory of the accounting department. Her heart was pounding as she made her way to her cubicle, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just happened, though she couldn't put her finger on what. What Lina didn't know was that the man in the elevator was Ethan Grant, the 32-year-old CEO and founder of Grant Industries. What she also didn't know was that this wasn't the first time he'd noticed her. Ethan Grant was not a man who believed in coincidences. He built his empire through careful observation, strategic planning, and an almost supernatural ability to read people. At 32, he was worth more than most small countries, but success had come at a price. He worked 18-hour days, slept 4 hours a night, and hadn't taken a real vacation in 5 years. His personal life was non-existent, reduced to carefully orchestrated public appearances and business dinners that served dual purposes. The elevator incident wasn't their first encounter, though Lina remained blissfully unaware of their previous meetings. 3 weeks earlier, Ethan had been reviewing quarterly reports when he'd noticed an anomaly in the accounting department's submissions. Someone had caught a significant error that could have cost the company millions. And when he'd investigated further, he discovered that the eagle-eyed analyst was a 24-year-old intern named Lina Park. Intrigued, he'd done what he always did when something caught his attention. He'd observed. He'd started taking different routes through the building, timing his movements to catch glimpses of her at work. He'd watched her through the glass walls of conference rooms as she presented findings to her supervisor. Noting the way she spoke with quiet confidence about complex financial concepts while still maintaining an almost painful shyness in social situations. There was something about her that fascinated him beyond her obvious talent. In a building full of people trying to climb the corporate ladder, often stepping on others to get there, Lina seemed genuinely kind. He'd seen her stay late to help struggling colleagues, watched her give up her lunch break to mentor new interns, observed the way she treated the security guards and cleaning staff with the same respect she showed senior POV executives. The elevator encounter had been unplanned, a result of his decision to take a different route to a morning meeting. When she'd bumped into him, apologizing in that soft voice that barely carried above the ambient noise, he'd felt something he hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't just attraction, though he'd be lying if he said he wasn't drawn to her delicate features and the way her hair caught the light. It was something deeper, a recognition of authenticity in a world that often felt manufactured. After she'd disappeared onto the 15th floor, Ethan had stood in the elevator for several more floors, thinking. He was a man accustomed to getting what he wanted, whether that was a competitor's company or a reservation at an impossible two-book restaurant. But this situation was different. This required finesse, patience, and a level of emotional intelligence that his business school education hadn't covered. Over the next few days, Ethan found himself engineering more accidental encounters. He'd take the elevator at times, when he knew she'd be traveling between floors, walk past the accounting department during her typical work hours, even linger in the lobby coffee shop where she sometimes grabbed her morning caffeine fix. Each time, he learned something new about her, filed away another piece of the puzzle that was Lina Park. He discovered that she always ordered the same thing at the coffee shop, a medium vanilla latte with an extra shot of espresso, and that she carried a small notebook where she jotted down ideas and observations throughout the day. He noticed that she wore minimal makeup, but had perfectly manicured nails, a small vanity that somehow made her more endearing. He observed that she never used the executive elevator, even when it would have been more convenient, as if she understood instinctively that it wasn't meant for someone at her level. What surprised him most was how much these small observations affected him. Ethan Grant was a man who made decisions based on data and logic, who approached relationships like business transactions with clear objectives and measurable outcomes. But watching Lina navigate her daily routine with such genuine kindness and quiet competence stirred something in him that felt dangerously close to vulnerability. The turning point came during her 4th week at the company. Ethan had been in back-to-back meetings all day, the kind of high-stakes negotiations that left even seasoned executives feeling drained. It was nearly 9 p.m. when he finally emerged from the conference room, his usual composed demeanor showing cracks of exhaustion. Most of the building was empty by then, just security guards and the occasional workaholic putting in extra hours. As he walked past the accounting department, he was surprised to see lights still on in one of the cubicles. Curious, he moved closer and saw Lina hunched over her computer, surrounded by stacks of papers and empty coffee cups. She was completely absorbed in her work, unaware of his presence as he watched her through the glass partition. She looked tired, but there was something beautiful about her concentration. The way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear as she compared numbers on her screen to the documents spread across her desk. Ethan found himself wondering what drove her to stay so late. What motivated this quiet dedication that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than mere ambition? As if sensing his presence, Lina looked up suddenly, and their eyes met through the glass. For a moment, neither of them moved, caught in an unexpected moment of connection across the empty office space. Then Lina's face flushed with embarrassment, and she quickly looked away, clearly mortified to have been caught working so late by someone she assumed was just another executive passing by. Ethan stepped back into the shadows, not wanting to make her more uncomfortable than she already was. But as he walked toward his own office, he made a decision that would change both of their lives. It was time to stop observing from the sidelines and take action. The next morning, Margaret Chen received an unusual request from the executive floor. The CEO's office wanted to meet with Lina Park to discuss her recent work on the quarterly financial analysis. Margaret was puzzled by the request, as it was highly unusual for an intern to be summoned to the 50th floor, but she wasn't about to question a direct order from the top. When Margaret approached Lina's cubicle with the news, she found the young woman in her usual state of quiet productivity, working through a stack of invoices with methodical precision. "Lina," Margaret said, her voice carrying a note of curiosity that she couldn't quite suppress. "I need you to report to the executive offices on the 50th floor at 2 p.m. today. They want to discuss your work on the quarterly analysis." Lina's face went pale, and she nearly dropped the invoice she was holding. "The executive floor? Did I do something wrong? I can review all my calculations again if there's an error." "I don't think you're in trouble," Margaret said, though her tone suggested she wasn't entirely certain. "Your work has been exceptional, and I submitted your analysis of the Henderson account discrepancy as part of the quarterly report. Perhaps they just want to discuss your findings in more detail." For the rest of the morning, Lina couldn't concentrate on her work. The executive floor was legendary among the lower-level employees, a realm of power and influence that existed 40 floors above their daily reality. She'd heard whispers about the corner office, with floor-to-ceiling windows, that offered a view of the entire city, about the conference rooms where million-dollar decisions were made over imported coffee and catered lunches. As 2 p.m. approached, Lina made her way to the express elevator that served only the top 10 floors of the building. Her hands were shaking slightly as she pressed the button for the 50th floor, and she spent the ride up trying to calm her racing heart and organize her thoughts. She'd brought copies of all her work on the Henderson account, along with her notebook where she documented every step of her analysis. The elevator doors opened to reveal a reception area that looked like something from a luxury hotel. The floors were polished marble, the furniture was leather and steel, and the walls were decorated with abstract art that probably cost more than most people's annual salaries. A receptionist with perfect makeup and an even more perfect smile directed Lina to a seating area where she waited, fidgeting with the strap of her bag and trying not to stare at the opulent surroundings. "Miss Park?" A woman in an expensive suit appeared beside her. "Mr. Grant will see you now." Lina's heart stopped. Mr. Grant, as in Ethan Grant, the CEO whose photo graced the cover of business magazines and whose success story was taught in MBA programs across the country. She'd seen his picture in the company newsletter, of course, but the idea that she might actually meet him had never crossed her mind. CEOs didn't meet with interns, especially not interns who spent their days in cubicles organizing spreadsheets. She was led down a hallway lined with windows that offered breathtaking views of the city below. At the end of the hall was a set of double doors, made of rich mahogany, and as they swung open, Lina stepped into an office that was larger than her entire apartment. The room was dominated by a massive desk positioned in front of windows that stretched from floor to ceiling. The view was spectacular, offering a panoramic perspective of the city that made Lina feel like she was floating above the world. But it wasn't the view that made her breath catch in her throat. It was the man standing behind the desk, his back to her as he looked out at the cityscape. "Miss Park," he said without turning around, his voice carrying the same worn tone she remembered from the elevator. "Thank you for coming up. Please, have a seat." When he turned to face her, Lina felt the world tilt on its axis. It was him, the man from the elevator, the one she'd bumped into and apologized to in whispered tones. The man whose steel-gray eyes had haunted her thoughts for the past several days was Ethan Grant, the billionaire CEO of Grant Industries. Ethan watched as recognition dawned in her eyes, followed quickly by mortification. He could see her calculating the implications, realizing that she'd collided with one of the most powerful men in the country and then fled without a backward glance. What she couldn't know was how much that moment had affected him, how it had sparked something that he was still trying to understand. "I believe we've met before," he said gently, moving around the desk to take the chair across from her rather than maintaining the intimidating barrier of his executive position. "Though we weren't properly introduced." Lina's face was burning with embarrassment. "Mr. Grant, I am so sorry about the elevator. I had no idea who you were, and I was so clumsy, and I just—" She was babbling now, her usual composure completely shattered by the revelation. "Please," Ethan said, holding up a hand to stop her frantic apologies. "There's nothing to apologize for. Accidents happen, and honestly, I found your reaction rather refreshing." He leaned back in his chair, studying her with those penetrating gray eyes that seemed to see everything. "What I'm curious about is your work, specifically your analysis of the Henderson account discrepancy. Can you walk me through how you identified the error that our senior analysts missed?" The change of subject helped Lina regain some of her composure. This was familiar territory, something she could discuss with confidence despite the surreal nature of the situation. She opened her notebook and began explaining her methodology, how she'd noticed inconsistencies in the quarterly reports that didn't align with the monthly statements. As she spoke, Ethan found himself impressed not just by her analytical skills, but by the way she explained complex concepts with clarity and precision. She'd clearly put considerable thought into her approach, and her conclusions were not only accurate, but demonstrated an intuitive understanding of financial patterns that couldn't be taught in textbooks. "The error was subtle," Lina continued, her confidence growing as she discussed her findings. "It would have been easy to miss if you weren't looking for it specifically, but the quarterly numbers showed a pattern that suggested someone was manipulating the data to hide a significant loss." "And what made you think to look for that pattern?" Ethan asked, genuinely curious about her thought process. Lina hesitated for a moment, as if deciding whether to share something personal. "My father owned a small restaurant when I was growing up. He wasn't very good with numbers, and sometimes his bookkeeper would adjust things to hide problems rather than addressing them directly. I learned to recognize the MA signs early." It was a small revelation, but it told Ethan volumes about her background and the experiences that had shaped her analytical instincts. He made a mental note to learn more about her family, her upbringing, the path that had led her to his company. "Your analysis saved the company approximately $12 million, Ethan said, watching her reaction carefully. "That's not the kind of contribution we typically see from interns." Lina's eyes widened. She'd known the discrepancy was significant, but she hadn't realized the full scope of the potential loss. "I was just doing my job," she said quietly. "Margaret always says to double-check everything, and when the numbers didn't add up, I kept digging until I found the source of the problem." "Margaret speaks very highly of you," Ethan said. "In fact, your supervisor has recommended you for our accelerated development program. It's designed for employees who show exceptional potential and leadership qualities." The offer hung in the air between them, and Lina felt that she was dreaming. The Accelerated Development Program was legendary among junior employees, a fast track to senior positions that was typically reserved for MBA graduates from top-tier schools. For an intern from a state university to be offered such an opportunity was almost unheard of. I don't know what to say," Lina stammered. "I'm honored that you would consider me, but I'm not sure I'm qualified for something like that." Ethan leaned forward, his expression becoming more intense. "Miss Park, qualification isn't just about degrees or pedigree. It's about insight, dedication, and the ability to see solutions where others see only problems. You've demonstrated all of those qualities in the short time you've been here." He stood up and walked back to the windows, his hands clasped behind his back as he looked out at the city. "The program would require you to work directly with senior management, to participate in high-level strategic discussions, and to take on projects that could significantly impact the company's direction. It's challenging, demanding, and not everyone who enters the program succeeds." When he turned back to face her, his expression was unreadable. "But I believe you have the potential not just to succeed, but to excel. The question is whether you're willing to step out of your comfort zone and embrace that potential." Lina's mind was racing. This was the kind of opportunity she'd dreamed about, but never dared to hope for. It represented everything she'd worked toward during her years of study and the long hours she'd put in as an intern. But it also terrified her. The thought of working directly with senior executives, of being scrutinized and evaluated at the highest levels of the company, made her palms sweat with anxiety. "Can I think about it?" she asked, her voice small in the vast office. It's a lot to process." Ethan nodded, understanding the magnitude of what he was offering. "Of course, take whatever time you need, but Lina," he paused, using her first name for the first time, "don't let fear make the decision for you. Sometimes the biggest risk is not taking any risk at all." As Lina left his office, her mind spinning with possibilities and implications, she couldn't shake the feeling that her life had just taken a dramatic turn. What she didn't realize was that Ethan Grant had been orchestrating this moment for weeks, carefully positioning the pieces on the chessboard until the time was right to make his move. That evening, Lina sat in her small apartment, staring at the city lights through her single window and trying to process everything that had happened. The revelation that the man from the elevator was Ethan Grant had been shocking enough, but the job offer had left her completely off balance. She'd called her parents to share the news, and their excitement and pride had only added to the pressure she felt to make the right decision. Her mother had cried when she heard about the opportunity, remembering all the nights Lina had stayed up late studying, all the scholarships and part-time jobs that had made her education possible. Her father, ever practical, had asked about the salary and benefits, but she could hear the amazement in his voice at how far his daughter had come from their modest beginnings. But beneath the excitement and disbelief, Lina couldn't shake a nagging sense of confusion about the entire situation. Why her? Why now? She was just one intern among dozens, working in a department that rarely received attention from the executive level. The timing felt too convenient, too perfectly aligned with her encounter with Ethan Grant in the elevator. As she replayed their conversation in his office, she began to notice things that hadn't registered in the moment. The way he'd seemed to know exactly what questions to ask about her background, how he'd been able to quote specific details about her work that weren't in any official reports. Most unsettling was the way he'd looked at her, not with the detached evaluation she'd expected from a CEO reviewing an employee's performance, but with something that felt almost personal. The next few days passed in a blur of speculation and second-guessing. Lina threw herself into her work with even more intensity than usual, as if proving her worth through spreadsheets and financial analyses could somehow make sense of the surreal turn her life had taken. Her colleagues in the accounting department had heard about her meeting with the CEO, and the news had spread through the office with the speed of wildfire. Some congratulated her with genuine warmth, excited to see one of their own recognized for her talents. Others were less generous, whispering about favoritism and wondering what she might have done to earn such attention from the top floor. Lina tried to ignore the gossip, but the speculation followed her through the hallways and lingered in the conversations that stopped abruptly when she entered a room. Margaret, her supervisor, was thrilled by the development and had taken credit for recommending Lina for the accelerated program. She'd scheduled several meetings to discuss Lina's transition, assuming that acceptance of the offer was a foregone conclusion. The older woman couldn't understand Lina's hesitation, couldn't fathom why anyone would need time to consider such an incredible opportunity. "Opportunities like this don't come along every day," Margaret said during one of their discussions. "Mr. Grant doesn't personally recruit employees for the development program. The fact that he took the time to meet with you himself speaks volumes about how impressed he is with your work." But that was exactly what worried Lina. In her research about Ethan Grant and the accelerated development program, She'd discovered that participants were typically recruited through a rigorous application process that involved multiple interviews, assessments, and background checks. The idea that she'd been selected based on a single project, no matter how successful, seemed to contradict everything she'd learned about the program's selectivity. Her doubts crystallized during a late evening at the office, when she found herself once again working past normal business hours. She'd been analyzing quarterly projections when she noticed a familiar figure walking past the accounting department. It was Ethan Grant, moving through the empty corridors with the quiet confidence of someone who owned not just the building but everything in it. When their eyes met through the glass partition, Lina felt that same electric recognition she'd experienced in the elevator. But this time, instead of looking away in embarrassment, she held his gaze. There was something in his expression that confirmed her growing suspicions, a familiarity that suggested their encounters weren't as accidental as they seemed. The next morning, Lina made a decision that surprised even herself. Instead of waiting for another summons to the executive floor, she took the initiative and requested a meeting with Mr. Grant. His assistant seemed surprised by the request, but scheduled her for that afternoon, suggesting that her access to the CEO was less restricted than it should have been for a typical intern. When she entered his office for the second time, Ethan was waiting for her with an expression that was carefully neutral. He gestured for her to take the same seat as before, but this time Lina remained standing, her hands clasped in front of her as she gathered the courage to voice the questions that had been plaguing her for days. "Mr. Grant," she began, her voice steadier than she felt, "I've been thinking about your offer, and I have some questions that I hope you'll answer honestly." Ethan leaned back in his chair, his gray eyes studying her with newfound interest. "Of course. What would you like to know? How long have you been watching me?" The question hung in the air between them, direct and unavoidable. Lina watched as various emotions flickered across Ethan's face: surprise, calculation, and something that might have been respect for her directness. "What makes you think I've been watching you?" he asked, but his tone suggested he already knew his deflection wouldn't work. "The elevator wasn't our first encounter, was it?" Lina pressed, her confidence growing with each word. "You knew details about my work that weren't in any reports Margaret submitted. You quoted specifics about my analysis that I'd only mentioned in casual conversations with colleagues. And the way you looked at me, both in the elevator and in our meeting, it wasn't the look of someone meeting a stranger." Ethan was quiet for a long moment, weighing his options. He could continue to deflect, could maintain the pretense that their meeting had been purely professional. But looking at Lina standing there, her cheeks flushed with determination and her eyes bright with intelligence, he realized that she deserved the truth, or at least a version of it. "You're right," he said finally. "I've been aware of you for several weeks now. Your work on the Henderson account brought you to my attention, and I wanted to learn more about the person behind such insightful analysis." "So you've been observing me," Lina said, not making it a question. "Following my routines, engineering encounters, learning about my habits and preferences. I prefer to think of it as due diligence," Ethan replied, but there was something almost sheepish in his expression. "I don't make personnel decisions lightly, especially for a program as selective as this one." Lina moved closer to his desk, her fear replaced by a mixture of indignation and curiosity. "Mr. Grant, with all due respect, that's not due diligence, that's surveillance, and it doesn't explain why you're offering me this opportunity now, after what amounts to weeks of secret observation." Ethan stood up, matching her directness with his own. "You want honesty? Here it is. Yes, I've been watching you, but not for the reasons you might think. Your talent caught my attention first. But what kept me interested was everything else. The way you treat people regardless of their position in the company hierarchy. The genuine kindness you show to colleagues who are struggling. The integrity you demonstrate when no one is watching." He moved around the desk, closing some of the distance between them. "In this business, those qualities are rare. Most people who reach positions of power do so by compromising their values along the way. You haven't, and I find that intriguing. Intriguing enough to stalk?" Lina challenged, though her anger was tempered by curiosity about his motivations. "Intriguing enough to want to know if what I was seeing was genuine," Ethan corrected. "And to consider whether someone with your combination of talent and character might be exactly what this company needs in its leadership ranks. The admission hung between them, loaded with implications that neither of them was quite ready to explore. Lina found herself staring into those gray eyes, trying to decipher the complex emotions she saw there. This wasn't just about business, she realized. There was something personal in his interest, something that went beyond professional development and talent recognition. And what if I don't want to be observed and evaluated like some kind of case study? She asked quietly. What if I prefer to succeed or fail based on my merits rather than becoming someone's pet project? Ethan's expression softened, and for the first time since she'd known him, he looked almost vulnerable. Then I would respect that decision, even though it would disappoint me more than you might realize. The honesty in his voice caught Lina off guard. She'd expected corporate doublespeak, carefully crafted responses designed to maintain professional boundaries. Instead, she was seeing glimpses of the man behind the CEO facade, someone who seemed as conflicted about this situation as she was. Why? She asked, the single word carrying the weight of all her confusion and curiosity. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. Because in a world where everyone wants something from me, you're the first person I've met who seems content with who she is and what she does. Because you apologized for bumping into me in Brow elevator without knowing who I was or what I could do for your career. Because you stayed late to help a colleague understand a difficult concept, even though there was no benefit to you personally. He paused, running a hand through his hair in a gesture that was surprisingly human. Because when I watch you work, I remember why I started this company in the first place. It wasn't just about building wealth or gaining power. It was about creating something meaningful. Something that could make a positive impact. Somewhere along the way, I lost sight of that vision. You reminded me what it looked like." End quote. End. Lina felt her resolve wavering. The man standing before her wasn't the intimidating billionaire CEO she'd imagined, but someone who seemed genuinely lonely and searching for something he couldn't quite name. She could see the weight of responsibility in his shoulders, the isolation that came with his position, the way success had perhaps cost him more than he'd ever intended to pay. "Mr. Grant?" she began, but he held up a hand to stop her. He said, "If we're being honest with each other, I think we can dispense with the formalities." "Ethan," she repeated, testing the name on her tongue. "What exactly are you asking of me? Because this feels like more than just a job offer." He was quiet for a moment, considering his words carefully. "I'm asking you to take a chance on the program, on your potential, and maybe on the possibility that two people from very different worlds might find something valuable in each other's perspectives." The admission hung in the air between them. Acknowledgement of the attraction and connection that had been building since their first encounter in the elevator. Lina felt her heart racing. Not just from the professional implications of his offer, but from the personal ones as well. "This is crazy," she said quietly, more to herself than to him. "I'm an intern from a state school, and you're Ethan Grant. This doesn't happen in real life." "Maybe that's exactly why it should happen," Ethan replied. "Maybe we've both been living in worlds that are too safe, too predictable. Maybe it's time to take a risk that has nothing to do with market analysis or profit margins." Lina looked out at the city spread below them, all glass and steel and endless possibility. She thought about her small apartment, her modest goals, the careful life she'd planned for herself. Then she thought about the man standing beside her, offering her not just a career opportunity, but a chance to step into a larger world than she'd ever imagined. "If I say yes," she said slowly, "if I accept this position, what happens then? Between us, I mean." Ethan's smile was small, but genuine. "Then we figure it out as we go. No more watching from the shadows, no more engineered encounters. Just two people getting to know each other honestly, while you prove to everyone, including yourself, that you belong in that program." Lina took a deep breath, feeling like she was standing at the edge of a cliff, about to jump into something that could either destroy her or transform her life completely. But as she looked at Ethan, saw the hope and vulnerability in his eyes, she realized that some risks were worth taking. "Okay," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. "I'll do it. I'll accept the position." Ethan's smile transformed his entire face, making him look younger and less intimidating than she'd ever seen him. "I'm glad," he said simply. "More glad than I probably should be." As Lina left his office that day, she felt like she was walking into an entirely new life. The shy intern who had apologized for bumping into a stranger in an elevator was still there, but she was being joined by someone braver, someone willing to take chances and embrace possibilities she'd never dared to consider. What she didn't know was that this was just the beginning. The accelerated development program would challenge her in ways she couldn't curb. Imagine testing not just her professional skills but her ability to navigate the complex world of corporate politics and high-stakes decision-making. She would discover strengths she didn't know she possessed and face obstacles that would force her to grow beyond her comfort zone. And through it all, Ethan would be there, sometimes as her mentor, sometimes as her advocate, and increasingly as something more personal than either of them had initially intended. Their relationship would develop slowly, built on mutual respect and shared challenges, complicated by the power dynamics of their professional relationship, but strengthened by the genuine connection they discovered in those honest moments in his office. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of orientation, sessions, training programs, and introductions to senior staff members who would play key roles in her development. Lina found herself thrust into a world of strategic planning meetings, executive briefings, and project assignments that would have seemed impossible just months earlier. Her first major assignment was to work with the mergers and acquisitions team on evaluating a potential acquisition that could significantly expand the company's market presence. It was the kind of high-stakes project that could make or break careers. And Lina approached it with the same methodical attention to detail that had characterized all of her work. As she delved into the financial records of the target company, she began to notice patterns that troubled her. The numbers looked good on the surface, but there were subtle inconsistencies that reminded her of the Henderson account discrepancy. She spent long hours double-checking her analysis, afraid to trust her instincts when so much was at stake. The acquisition was worth nearly $200 million, and the entire senior management team seemed convinced it was a smart strategic move. Lina found herself in the uncomfortable position of being the only person who had serious concerns about the deal. The target company's revenue growth looked impressive, but when she dug deeper into their accounting practices, she discovered what appeared to be systematic inflation of their customer base and contract values. Her first instinct was to bring her concerns to Margaret, but her former supervisor was no longer her direct report. As part of the accelerated program, Lina now reported directly to the executive team, which meant her findings would go straight to the people who were most invested in making the acquisition happen. The pressure was immense, and she found herself questioning whether she was seeing problems that didn't exist or whether her analysis was uncovering something that others had missed. It was during one of these late-night review sessions that Ethan found her in the conference room, surrounded by financial statements and looking more stressed than he'd ever seen her. She'd been in the program for 3 weeks, and while she was excelling in many areas, he could see that the pressure was taking its toll. "Working late again?" he asked, settling into the chair across from her with 2 cups of coffee from his private machine. Lina looked up, grateful for the interruption, but also nervous about discussing her concerns. Their relationship had developed into something comfortable over the past few weeks, a mentorship that felt natural despite their very different backgrounds. But this was the first time she'd encountered a situation where her analysis might directly conflict with the company's interests. "I'm reviewing the Morrison acquisition files," she said, accepting the coffee gratefully. "There's something about their financials that doesn't sit right with me, but I can't decide if I'm being overly cautious or if there's a real problem." Ethan leaned back in his chair, studying her expression. "What kind of problem?" Lina hesitated, then decided that honesty had served her well so far. "I think they're inflating their numbers. Not dramatically enough to be obvious, but consistently enough to make their growth trajectory look more impressive than it actually is. If I'm right, we'd be paying a significant premium for a company that isn't performing as well as they claim." "Show me," Ethan said simply. For the next hour, Lina walked him through her analysis, pointing out the discrepancies she'd identified and explaining why they concerned her. Ethan listened without interruption, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but mostly just absorbing the information she presented. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "You realize what you're suggesting?" he asked finally. "This acquisition has been in the works for 6 months. The board has already approved it in principle, and we've made significant commitments to the sellers." "I know," Lina said quietly, "and I could be wrong. Maybe I'm seeing patterns that aren't there, or maybe these discrepancies have innocent explanations. But if I'm right, this deal could cost the company far more than the purchase price." Ethan stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights while he processed what she'd told him. This was exactly the kind of situation he'd hoped she would handle well, a test of her ability to stand by her analysis, even when it contradicted popular opinion. But it was also a test of his own leadership, his willingness to listen to inconvenient truths even when they threatened carefully laid plans. "What would you recommend?" he asked, turning back to face her. "I think we need to conduct a more thorough due diligence review," Lina said, her confidence growing as she spoke. "Specifically, I think we should bring in an independent auditing firm to verify their customer contracts and revenue recognition practices. If I'm wrong, we lose a few weeks and some audit fees. If I'm right, we avoid a potentially catastrophic mistake." Ethan nodded slowly. "And if the audit confirms your suspicions, what then?" "Then we either renegotiate the terms based on the actual performance data, or we walk away from the deal entirely," Lina replied, without hesitation. It was a bold recommendation from someone who'd been in the program for less than a month, but Ethan found himself impressed by her conviction. She wasn't just identifying problems, she was proposing solutions and taking ownership of the consequences. It was exactly the kind of leadership thinking he'd hoped to see from her. "I'll arrange for the independent audit," he said. "But I want you to lead the review process. If you're going to challenge a $200 million acquisition, you need to be prepared to defend your analysis at the highest levels." The next few weeks were some of the most challenging of Lina's professional life. The independent audit confirmed many of her suspicions, revealing that Morrison Industries had been systematically overstating their contract values and understating their customer churn rates. The company was profitable, but nowhere near as successful as their financial statements suggested. The revelation sent shockwaves through the senior management team. Some executives were angry about the delay and additional costs, while others were grateful that a potentially disastrous mistake had been avoided. Lina found herself at the center of heated discussions about due diligence procedures and risk management, defending her analysis to people who had decades more experience than she did. Through it all, Ethan provided steady support, backing her findings and ensuring that her voice was heard in executive meetings. But he also made it clear that she needed to stand on her own merits, that his belief in her abilities didn't absolve her of the responsibility to prove herself to others. The situation came to a head during a board meeting, where the acquisition decision would be finalized. Lina had been invited to present her findings directly to the board of directors, a group of accomplished business leaders who weren't known for their patience with junior employees who challenged their decisions. As she stood before the boardroom table, looking at faces that represented billions of dollars in combined wealth and experience, Lina felt a moment of panic. These were people who could end her career with a single phone call, who had no reason to listen to the concerns of an intern who'd been with the company for less than 2 months. But then she caught Ethan's eye across the table, saw the confidence and encouragement in his expression, and remembered why she was there. She wasn't representing just herself, but the integrity of the analysis process and the company's long-term interests. Her presentation was clear, concise, and devastating. She methodically dismantled Morrison Industries' financial claims, showing exactly how they'd manipulated their reporting to create an illusion of growth that didn't exist. When she finished, the room was silent for a long moment. "Miss Park," said the board chairman, an elderly man whose wealth dated back to the oil boom of the 1988s, "are you absolutely certain of these findings?" "Yes, sir," Lina replied without hesitation. "The independent audit confirmed every concern I raised and revealed several additional issues that we hadn't initially identified." Another board member leaned forward. And what do you recommend we do about the acquisition? I recommend we withdraw our offer, Lina said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was suggesting. Morrison Industries is not the company they represented themselves to be, and proceeding with this acquisition would not serve our shareholders' interests. The board voted unanimously to follow her recommendation, killing a deal that had been 6 months in the making. It was a victory for thorough analysis and due diligence, but Lina knew it had also made her some enemies within the company. Not everyone appreciated having their judgment questioned by someone so new to the corporate world. In the weeks that followed, Lina's reputation within the company solidified. She was known as someone who wouldn't compromise her integrity for convenience, who would speak truth to power regardless of the personal cost. Some colleagues respected her for it, while others viewed her as a threat to the comfortable consensus that often governed corporate decision-making. Her relationship with Ethan continued to evolve during this period, shifting from mentor and student to something more like equal partners in the complex dance of corporate leadership. He valued her insights and increasingly relied on her analysis for major decisions, but he was also careful to maintain appropriate boundaries given their professional relationship. The turning point in their personal connection came during a company retreat in the mountains, an annual event designed to build team cohesion among senior staff. Lina had been included as part of her development program, though she felt somewhat out of place among executives who'd known each other for years. The retreat included various team-building activities and strategic planning sessions, but it also provided opportunities for more casual interactions. On the second evening, Lina found herself walking alone along the mountain trail, needing some space to process everything that had happened over the past few months. She was surprised when Ethan appeared on the trail behind her, having apparently decided to take the same route for his evening exercise. They walked together in comfortable silence for a while, both of them appreciating the peace and natural beauty that was so different from their usual urban environment. "Thank you," Ethan said eventually, breaking the silence. "For what?" Lina asked, genuinely puzzled. "For the Morrison deal, for having the courage to challenge something that everyone else accepted without question, for proving that I was right to believe in you." Lina smiled, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the physical exertion of hiking. "I was terrified," she admitted. "Standing in front of that board, knowing that I was essentially calling them all wrong about something they'd already decided. I kept thinking about all the ways it could destroy my career. But you did it anyway," Ethan observed. "That's what real leadership looks like. Not the absence of fear, but the willingness to do what's right despite being afraid." They reached a scenic overlook where the trail widened, offering a spectacular view of the valley below. The sun was setting, painting the mountains in shades of gold and purple that seemed almost too beautiful to be real. They stood side by side at the railing, both of them aware that something was shifting between them. Some barrier that had been carefully maintained was beginning to dissolve. "Could I ask you something personal?" Lina said, her voice soft in the mountain air. "Of course. Do you ever regret it? Building all of this, achieving everything you've accomplished? Does it ever feel like it cost you too much?" Ethan was quiet for so long that Lina began to worry she'd overstepped. But when he finally spoke, his voice carried a vulnerability she'd never heard before. "Every day," he said quietly. "I used to think that success was just about reaching goals, accumulating achievements that would prove I was worth something. But somewhere along the way, I realized that I'd built a life that was impressive from the outside but felt empty from within." End quote. He turned to look at her, and she could see the loneliness in his eyes that he usually kept hidden behind his confident executive facade. "I have everything I thought I wanted, but very little that actually makes me happy. Until recently, I'd forgotten what it felt like to look forward to coming to work, to feel excited about the future rather than just grimly determined to maintain what I built." End quote. "What changed?" Lina asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "You did," Ethan said simply. "Watching you work, seeing your genuine enthusiasm and integrity, it reminded me why I started this journey in the first place. You made me remember what it felt like to care about something beyond profit, margins, and market share." The admission hung between them, loaded with implications that neither of them was quite ready to fully explore. Lina felt her heart racing, not just from the attraction she'd been fighting for weeks, but from the realization that she might actually be falling in love with this complex, brilliant, lonely man who'd somehow seen something special in her. "Ethan," she began, but he held up a hand to stop her. "I know this is complicated," he said. "I know there are power dynamics and professional considerations that make this messy, but I also know that what I feel for you goes beyond professional admiration or mentorship. And I hope that you might feel something similar." Lina looked out at the mountains, trying to organize her thoughts and emotions into something coherent. Everything about this situation violated the careful boundaries she'd maintained throughout her career, the rules about keeping personal and professional relationships separate. But standing there with Ethan, feeling the genuine connection between them, those rules seemed less important than the possibility of something real and meaningful. "I do," she said quietly. "Feel something similar, but I'm scared, not just about the professional implications, but about the difference in our worlds. You're Ethan Grant, and I'm still that shy girl who apologized for bumping into you in an elevator." Ethan stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his presence. "That shy girl is exactly who I fell for," he said gently. "Not despite who you are, but because of it. You don't need to become someone else to deserve this, Lina. You just need to believe that you're worth it." When he kissed her, soft and tentative at first, then with growing confidence as she responded, Lina felt like she was finally stepping fully into the new life that had been waiting for her since that day in the elevator. It wasn't just about the career opportunity or the financial security, but about the possibility of love and partnership with someone who saw her potential even when she couldn't see it herself. The months that followed were a careful dance of professional growth and personal discovery. Lina continued to excel in the Accelerated Development Program, taking on increasingly complex projects and earning the respect of colleagues who had initially been skeptical of her rapid promotion. Her success with the Morrison acquisition had established her reputation as someone with exceptional analytical abilities and the courage to stand by her convictions. Her relationship with Ethan developed slowly and carefully, both of them aware of the scrutiny that would come if their personal connection became public knowledge. They kept their professional interactions appropriately formal, but found ways to spend time together outside the office, exploring the city's restaurants and cultural offerings, discovering shared interests and values that deepened their connection beyond the initial attraction. Ethan proved to be surprisingly down-to-earth in personal settings, someone who could laugh at himself and wasn't afraid to show vulnerability. Lina learned about his childhood as the son of middle-class teachers, his struggles to build his first company while working multiple jobs to pay the bills, the personal sacrifices he'd made along the way to success. She realized that despite their different starting points, they shared similar values about hard work, integrity, and the importance of staying true to yourself, even when external pressures suggested otherwise. For her part, Lina found herself growing into the confidence that Ethan had seen in her from the beginning. The shy intern who had once hidden in the shadows was gradually replaced by someone who could command attention in board meetings, who could present complex analyses to senior executives without her voice shaking, who could make difficult decisions and stand by them even when they were unpopular. The transformation wasn't always easy. There were moments of self-doubt, times when the imposter syndrome threatened to overwhelm her progress. There were colleagues who resented her rapid advancement and whispered about favoritism and unfair advantages. There were family gatherings where she struggled to explain her new life to relatives who couldn't understand how their quiet, studious girl had ended up in the world of corporate power and influence. But through it all, Ethan was there as both professional mentor and personal support. He helped her navigate the complex politics of executive leadership, while also being the person she could confide in about her fears and uncertainties. Their relationship was built on mutual respect and genuine affection, but also on a shared vision of what their professional partnership could accomplish. The culmination of Lina's development program came with an opportunity that would test everything she'd learned over the past year. Grant Industries was considering expanding into international markets, specifically targeting opportunities in Southeast Asia, where economic growth was creating new possibilities for American companies. The project would require someone who could analyze complex market conditions, navigate cultural differences, and build relationships with potential partners across multiple countries. When Ethan offered her the position as head of international development, Lina realized that she'd reached a crossroads that would define not just her career, but her identity. The role would make her one of the youngest senior executives in the company's history, with responsibilities that would affect thousands of employees and millions of dollars in revenue. It was everything she'd worked toward, but it was also terrifying in its scope and complexity. "I need to know that you're ready for this," Ethan said during the meeting where he formally offered her the position. "Not just professionally, but personally. This role will put you in the spotlight in ways that might be uncomfortable. There will be media attention, industry scrutiny, and internal pressure from people who think you've risen too fast." Lina considered his words carefully. A year ago, the prospect of such attention would have sent her into a panic. But now, after months of proving herself in increasingly challenging situations, she found that the fear was manageable. More than that, she was excited by the opportunity to apply everything she'd learned to something meaningful and impactful. "I'm ready," she said, and for the first time in her life, she truly believed it. The announcement of her promotion sent ripples through both the company and the broader business community. Trade publications ran articles about her rapid rise, speculating about her background and the factors that had contributed to her success. Some coverage was positive, focusing on her analytical abilities and fresh perspective. Other articles were less generous, questioning whether her advancement was based purely on merit or influenced by other factors. Lina found the media attention overwhelming at first, but she gradually learned to manage it as part of her professional responsibilities. She gave interviews where she discussed her vision for international expansion, participated in industry conferences where she shared insights about market analysis, and slowly built a public reputation that was independent of her association with Ethan. Their personal relationship continued to deepen during this period, though they remained discreet about it. They'd found a rhythm that allowed them to be partners in both business and life, while maintaining appropriate professional boundaries. Colleagues who worked closely with them began to suspect that there was something personal between them, but both Lina and Ethan were careful not to let their relationship affect their professional judgment or create stress. Conflicts of interest. The international expansion project proved to be everything Lina had hoped for, and more. She traveled extensively, meeting with potential partners and analyzing market conditions in countries she'd only read about in textbooks. Her natural shyness, which had once seemed like a liability, actually proved to be an asset in cultures that valued modesty and careful listening over aggressive self-promotion. Her first major success came with a joint venture in Vietnam, where her methodical approach to due diligence helped identify a local partner whose values aligned with Grant Industries' commitment to ethical business practices. The partnership opened doors to other opportunities throughout the region, and within 6 months, the international division was generating revenue that exceeded even the most optimistic projections. As her professional success grew, so did her personal confidence. The transformation that had begun with a chance encounter in an elevator was now complete. Lina Park was no longer the shy intern who apologized for taking up space, but a confident executive who could hold her own in any boardroom or negotiation. She'd found her voice and learned to use it effectively, while still maintaining the kindness and integrity that had first caught Ethan's attention. The story might have ended there, with professional success and personal fulfillment creating a neat conclusion to Lina's journey. But life, as both she and Ethan had learned, rarely followed the scripts that people wrote for themselves. The challenge came from an unexpected source, a hostile takeover bid from a larger corporation that saw Grant Industries as an attractive acquisition target. The offer was substantial, enough to make many shareholders seriously consider selling, but it also threatened everything that Ethan had built over the past decade. The acquiring company had a reputation for aggressive cost-cutting and cultural changes that often destroyed the values and practices that had made their targets successful. As the takeover battle intensified, Lina found herself playing a crucial role in developing the company's defense strategy. Her international experience had given her insights into global market trends that proved valuable in making the case for Grant Industries' independent future. More importantly, Her analytical skills helped identify weaknesses in the acquiring company's financial position that could be exploited in the fight. The battle for control of Grant Industries lasted 6 months, with both sides deploying armies of lawyers, investment bankers, and public relations specialists. Lina worked 18-hour days, coordinating with international partners, analyzing financial data, and helping craft the strategic response that would ultimately determine the company's fate. Through it all, her relationship with Ethan was tested in ways they hadn't anticipated. The stress of potentially losing everything he'd built brought out aspects of his personality that she hadn't seen before, a ruthless determination that sometimes conflicted with her own values about fairness and ethical business practices. They had their first serious argument during the takeover battle, a heated discussion about tactics that revealed fundamental differences in their approaches to conflict. But they also discovered that their partnership was stronger than their disagreements. When the pressure was greatest and the outcome most uncertain, they found ways to support each other that went beyond professional collaboration. Lina's steady presence and analytical clarity helped Ethan make rational decisions when emotion threatened to cloud his judgment. His experience and strategic vision gave her the confidence to propose bold solutions that a less experienced executive might not have dared to suggest. The turning point came when Lina identified a legal vulnerability in the acquiring company's financing structure, a complex arrangement that violated certain regulatory requirements. Her discovery gave Grant Industries the leverage needed to not only defeat the takeover bid, but to expose financial irregularities that ultimately led to criminal charges against several executives at the acquiring company. When the battle was finally over, and Grant Industries had successfully maintained its independence, Lina realized that she'd played a central role in saving not just the company, but the jobs and livelihoods of thousands of employees. It was a responsibility that had initially terrified her, but one that she'd ultimately embraced with the same determination and integrity that had characterized her entire journey. In the aftermath of their victory, as they stood once again in Ethan's office, looking out at the city below, both of them exhausted but triumphant, Lina reflected on how far she'd come since that first accidental encounter in the elevator. She was no longer the shy intern who'd apologized for taking up space, but she also hadn't lost the essential qualities that had made her special in the first place. She'd simply learned to combine her natural kindness and integrity with the confidence and skills needed to succeed at the highest levels of corporate leadership. "What happens now?" she asked, echoing the question she'd posed a year earlier when Ethan had first offered her a position in the Accelerated Development Program. Ethan smiled, the same expression that had transformed his face during their first honest conversation. But now it carried additional layers of affection, respect, and partnership that had developed through months of shared challenges and mutual support. "Now, we build something even better," he said, taking her hand in a gesture that was both personal and professional. Together, as they stood there, planning the future of Grant Industries and their own relationship, Lina thought about the young woman who had rushed into a crowded elevator and accidentally bumped into a stranger. That moment of clumsiness had indeed changed her entire life, but not in the way she could ever have imagined. It hadn't just brought her professional success or financial security, though it had certainly provided both. More importantly, it had given her the opportunity to discover who she really was and what she was capable of achieving. The shy girl who had once hidden in the shadows had learned to step into the light, not by becoming someone else, but by embracing the best parts of herself and finding the courage to share them with the world. And in doing so, she'd not only transformed her own life, but it helped transform the man who'd first seen her potential and the company they now led together. Their story was far from over. There would be new challenges, additional opportunities for growth, and the ongoing adventure of building both a business partnership and a personal relationship that could withstand the pressures of their high-profile positions. But as they looked toward the future, both Lina and Ethan knew that whatever came next, they would face it together, with the same combination of professional excellence and personal integrity that had brought them to this moment. The elevator encounter that had started it all seemed like a lifetime ago, but its impact continued to ripple through their lives in ways both large and small. Sometimes, The most significant changes begin with the smallest gestures, and sometimes the most profound connections are forged in the most unexpected circumstances. For Lina Park and Ethan Grant, a moment of accidental contact in a crowded elevator had become the foundation for a partnership that would define not just their careers, but their lives.